Hello, everybody. Welcome to twitch.tv/the Onyx Path, where we have gathered once again for an episode of a Storypath Nexus writing session. We have been working on a release for the Trinity Continuum for Aeon, and that release is Assault on Nemesis Station. We've been building this together now. This is the eighth episode, ninth episode. I'm not sure which, but we are well into building this adventure. We're going to do a recap of what we've done so far before we dive into new material today. But before we do, there's a couple things I want to bring to everybody's attention. First off, all month long, we are raising money as part of the Make-A-Wish Roll for Wishes campaign. Make-A-Wish is a wonderful charity that basically they grant wishes to and equipment for folks that are suffering with terminal illness. It's a great cause. We're happy to support it, so we highly recommend heading over there and tossing them a few bucks if you can. We also would like to make you aware that the World Below is currently raising funds on BackerKit. The World Below is a brand new setting from Onyx Path Publishing that focuses on subterranean horror and survival. It's heavily fantasy inspired, and it is super fun. I just played in an actual play of it yesterday, which you can watch in the VOD if you're a subscriber already. Otherwise, it'll be up in a few days over at YouTube. The setting, I had the chance to work on the powers. It was super fun to work on, and I'm very excited about how that turned out. We also had the legendary Ed Greenwood working on setting building, and in fact, one of the stretch goals that just got unlocked on that campaign is Ed Greenwood's monstrous monstrous ecology. Oncology? Yeah, not monsters with cancer, monsters with their living environments. But that has now been unlocked. We've got several more stretch goals lined up, so if you've not yet done so, please head over there and check out the World Below. Lastly, I want to bring a couple of releases over at Drive-Thru RPG to your attention. In case you missed the memo, the Lore of the Traditions for Mage 20th Anniversary Edition has just dropped in print on demand. So the PDF was already out, and now you can pick it up in POD. It is over there right now at Drive-Thru RPG. Very excited, very proud of that book. Had a wonderful time working on it, and had the extreme pleasure of working with some very, very talented writers on that book. So I highly recommend checking that out. The other new release from Onyx Path this week is They Came from the Cabin in the Woods. This is a tasty bit for They Came from Camp Murder Lake. If you've watched this channel for any time, you know I'm a huge fan of They Came from Camp Murder Lake. I love the entire They Came From series. And Camp Murder Lake is right up there at the top of the list. Highly recommend checking out this collection of scenarios, really centered around a single map. It's $1.99, and it comes with everything you need basically to run it, along with Camp Murder Lake, obviously. And it includes maps that you can use in any VTT of your choice. So definitely head over there and check that out. And then lastly, and then I will stop paying bills. I just had something come out on the Storyteller's Vault. A brand new release from me called The Dread Touched. And what the Dread Touch does is that is a brand new character type. It's basically like a minor template that you can use in Chronicles of Darkness. It basically allows you to play a hybrid between mortals and horrors as they appear in Chronicles of Darkness. So you can play a normal person, but you start to take on monstrous aspects. You then must contend with maintaining your own moral integrity in the face of your growing monstrous power. And there are some of the Dread Touched who wind up succumbing completely to their monstrous halves, turning completely into horrors. Those are known as the Devoured. The Dread Touched either try to hunt them or try to avoid them. So it's a whole sort of sub-seed for a campaign in Chronicles of Darkness. And that is available for the low price of $1.95 over at Storyteller's Vault. I would love it if you would check that out as well. After all, the reason for the show is community content. And thank you so much for the bits, Void Nothing. Greatly appreciate it. Any support through bits, subscriptions, all that stuff, always a joy. So let's dive into it. When last we got together for Assault on Nemesis Station, we were working on... We've got our antagonists largely statted out. We've not done any sort of like heavy description work on them as of yet. That'll probably be the last thing that we do, to be honest with you, is we will flesh out the descriptions of the story guide characters and the antagonists. Now, that is something I may choose to do off stream, because we've discussed kind of what their combat capabilities are, the roles that they're playing in the story, the minutia of how I choose to describe something. I don't know if that's particularly interesting enough to be streamed material, and also it's just going to really depend on whether I get to it in my downtime between streams. I've sort of gently accepted that I'm probably going to be doing most of my work on this project during stream time, but I do still absolutely reserve the right to work on it in the downtime between, and just sort of share progress updates as they come about. So what we had really gotten into the last session was sort of expanding our scene structure. We have our various scene one sort of introductions that the party might enjoy to bring into themselves into the story. Many of these focus on needing to try to get into the secure storage of the station to enact repairs on their ship, though not all of them. There are some situations where the crew shows up with a fully functional ship, and that's fine. Our second scene covers the actual arrival and the state in which they find Nemesis Station. Spoiler, it's not in great shape when they get there. The doors are sealed. There's no easy way to get inside. You either basically need to hack your way past the doors, the security doors, or you need to blast your way through, exposing the interior of the station to the hard vacuum of outer space. Neither one of those is ideal. But obviously, if you want to wander in there freely and safely, hacking's probably the way to go. Then we describe kind of what the characters find throughout the wrecked interior of the station, and ways that they can kind of investigate what has brought on the current state of affairs there. Through that investigation, they discover that the station was in fact attacked by aberrants, that several of the station personnel, if not all of them, were taken by those aberrants into some sort of subterranean tunnel network. See, it's on theme for the world below. The third scene presumes that our characters are heroic and well-meaning enough to follow those unfortunates into the tunnel that the aberrants took off with them through. Now, there is nothing saying that if the party as a whole goes, well, that's all very sad, let's fix our ship and get the hell out of here. No reason they can't do that. They're more than welcome to. But, player characters in these games often tend toward the heroic side, so we're going to presume that they're going to go that direction and write the game accordingly. If you're running this down the road and you're looking for insight on what to do if the players say, well, that's all sad and tragic, let's go report it to somebody else and make it not our problem, my advice is let them do it. If that's the choice they want to make as characters, if that's the way that they feel makes the best story, let them do it. Let them do it. Let them find out later on what happened. These events can play out whether or not the characters are really directly involved. Obviously, if the characters do not intervene on behalf of the prisoners, those prisoners are going to be in for a bad time. But let the characters find that out through the course of events 3-4 sessions later when they discover that their inaction cost a bunch of lives. But that's not what we're assuming is going to happen. We're assuming they're going to be heroic Samaritans and go in and save the day. So we got that written through up to the end of scene 3. So effectively, as they're walking through these subterranean areas, kind of pursuing where the aberrants went, they will come across some divergent aberrants. They may be able to defeat those aberrants and move along. Some of those aberrants may try to run out to basically be there to vex them again later on in the story. There's also notes covered in here as to what to do in the event that the party is knocked unconscious. It's one of the things that you want to try to plan for when you're writing. Is giving the story guide options for, if this thing doesn't go the player's way, what stops the story from stopping, right? Because you could say, well, the aberrants defeat the players, and then the players are either killed or they wake up, and everything's gone and there's no hope for saving anyone, and all the clues have vanished and the aberrants have gone on. But that's not a horrifically compelling story. So I think it's better to say, okay, well, they get knocked out, then they get taken prisoner, right? It's really kind of the simple idea of giving the story guide different sort of off-ramps to avoid the story being shut down by, failed dice rolls or, a poor decision being made on the player's part. So it's really just making sure that those bases are covered. So we've got it written down through if they defeat the aberrants, they regain the trail and start making their way to the aberrant settlement. If they're taken out, they wake up and proceed normally. And then if they manage to track the abductees through the tunnels without being stopped by the aberrants, they find their way at the outer edge of the settlement. And once there, they're confronted by divergent aberrants. These are the ones effectively that may have attacked them earlier, but if they don't attack them earlier, they catch them here. Those divergent aberrants are hostile, and they fight until 3 of them are taken out or all of them are reduced to half health or lower. So it's another thing that I like to try to work into adventures. I think enemies fighting to the death should be more of a rare exception than like the rule of thumb, as it were. I think people are less compelled to fight beyond reason. I think there should be, surrender or abandonment circumstances, things that the story guide can turn to and say, okay, well, this has gotten bad enough that these antagonists are going to allow their sense of self-preservation to take over, and they're going to get out of there. So we've got that written in. Now, of course, there's nothing stopping a particularly merciless band of player characters from, gunning them down while they try to flee, but we give them the option to try to escape at least. And then Okay, I just have a vestigial paragraph that's here that kind of summarizes what happened previously. So we've got the fight broken down. We've got the basic idea that of where the aberrant attitudes are. We're gonna dive in and just sort of clean up the end of this scene because we say, well, if they're defeated, they do X. If the party loses, Y happens. So let's just sort of sum this up that if the party is victorious, they may make their way into the settlement and we'll say once they're there, because we need to get them, all roads need to point to that meeting hall, right? This is a place where sort of illusion of choice type of design comes into play. We want to make sure that we are ever sort of ushering the characters toward that meeting hall without railroading them into it, making it feel like that's their decision, that's their chosen course of action to head to that meeting hall. So we'll say if players victorious to make their way into the settlement, as they venture inside, they find dozens of sub-aberrant mutants, all converging on the meeting hall. So now we have like a clear reason that's steering them towards that area, right? They start making their way in, they see everybody else is sort of making their way toward this building. I think we should maybe we need to address the possibility that the party is going to want to investigate the settlement itself, right? They're going to want to dive in, see what's going on, see what information they can dig up. So let's address that. I'm just trying to think organizationally whether we should put that in scene 3 or scene 4. I think scene 3 is really the tunnels, right? So scene 4 is really what is happening inside. Okay. So let's say upon seeing this, the party may choose to investigate the settlement. We'll say breaking into or surveying buildings and shelters. Or engaging in or searching the streets for evidence about these mysterious settlers. And we probably want to have some clues that they can discover. But yeah, let's bump this to scene 4. So if the party is victorious in the previous scene, they make their way into the settlement. As they venture inside, they find dozens of sub-aberrant mutants, all converging on the meeting hall. Upon seeing this, party may choose to investigate the settlement, breaking into or surveying buildings and shelters, or searching the streets for evidence about these mysterious settlers. So we'll say investigating the settlement yields the following clues. Now, the cool thing about this is we do not actually need to employ the core clues portion here, right? Because the way core clues are designed, the purpose that they serve is to ensure that the story will move forward, that the characters never get hung up on some sort of narrative trap, right? Like, I can't make the dice roll to learn this thing, so therefore the story is completely stalled out. We don't necessarily want to see that happen, so that's why we have the core clues in place. Now, we could throw in a couple core clues just to, I guess, make there be some narrative reason for this beat, something to justify the player's agency. So I guess a core clue or two might not be a bad idea. There's nothing wrong with making core clues that are relatively obvious if you don't need a piece of information to connect part A to part B, right? If you don't need something that's going to ensure the story flows a certain way, you can also use core clues to sort of state the obvious, as it were. So I think with that in mind, some core clues that we might want to include, and it just occurs to me that I have done some of these backwards, so I'm going to fix that in formatting momentarily here. But first, let's pop these down here, just so we've got some easy formatting. All right, so we have core clue, the aberrants and their sub-aberrant followers have established a permanent settlement beneath the surface of Nemesis. And that's probably the only real core clue we need. Maybe we can also add we'll say the people living in the settlement have all been exposed to corruption to the point that they bear mutations And I just want to make a quick check for terminology. It's one of the things that can be get you a bit hung up when you're working on any content for really any setting, but particularly in Trinity Continuum, there are different stages, different widgets that aberrant and subaberrant mutations get their hands on. Subaberrant mutants, I should say, get their hands on. You want to make sure that you're not confusing that terminology when you're referencing it. So in order to avoid that, I'm going to go ahead and crack open the book and just see, because I want to make sure that we've got our language right. In the meantime, as always, if you have any questions, comments, complaints, or concerns about what we got going on, feel free to ask. Love to discuss the choices we're making and why we're making them. That sort of thing. Always happy to do so. So I've got my copy of Aeon open. Go back to our opponents and allies. We're going to go into aberrants, and we're going to scroll down and see what our subaberrant mutants get. So they get qualities, technically, right? You're not looking at mutations until you get into divergent aberrants. So how about we say so they've developed qualities. And then we will cite where that comes from, right? So that way everything's consistent. They know we're talking about the thing that we're talking about, and the story guide can always refer to exactly what it is that we have in mind. And that qualities are explained. In Aeon, page 33, page 333. So now we've got that cited. And that covers our two core clues. Now, we can start getting into some extra stuff. This is an opportunity to create some references that the story guide may or may not use. This entire section here that we're about to fill out could conceivably just be glossed over and skipped, right? There's no reason why the story guide would have to incorporate this information. The story will move along just fine without it. However, sometimes it's advisable, it's good to put in some stuff that enriches that experience, right? That cool extra details in case the characters want to delve a little deeper. Make sure I got those lined up nicely. Once again, one of the reasons why I prefer to work in InDesign. I'm going to catch a couple of these mistakes before I go any further forward here. One of the reasons I prefer to work directly in InDesign is because I can spot things that are wrong and fix them as I go, as opposed to doing so when the whole thing's written and then realizing like, oh, I need to add X number of traits, or I need to, adjust this table this way because it doesn't fit the other way. Things like that. You don't want to be I guess, surprised by what it is that you're facing when you get in the layout. No, most of the time you just have to be. That's the reality of doing business. Because most of the time, I say most of the time, like most of the time, if you're working on it professionally, you have an entirely different department that's handling your layout. So it's uh, not really anything you can do about it. Those decisions get made kind of above your pay grade. But when you're doing it yourself, if you have access to the tools, you have the liberty to sort of take that workflow on and prevent, or at least mitigate some of the speed bumps that can come along in layout, if that makes sense. That may be something that is literally only interesting to me, so my apologies if I'm boring the absolute shit out of you talking about it. But yeah, I think it's a lot of I think it's an important thing, and it's a good way to keep things flowing, keep things fun for the on the creative side. Is to be able to sit there and say, okay, well, I see this thing, that thing. You can have sort of the I don't know, satisfaction of catching problems before they become problems is also nice too. So yeah, those are right. Though I don't know when I got sloppy with my tab key, but here we are fixing some tabs. It's fine. Happens to the best of us. The order, however, is correct though. Um, and when in doubt too about your formatting, the best thing to do, in my opinion, is just to go back to the source material, look at how it's formatted there, and adapt accordingly. I'm also gonna prevent myself from having that same dang problem here when I get to the next section by reformatting all these appropriately. And again, this just sort of keeps us from making a sloppy mistake and having our thing look silly when it's all said and done, right? Because while I firmly believe that if you put up quality content, the appearance is not going to be nearly as important. So, like, you don't have to have spot on formatting if you're telling a good story. It never hurts. So, do what you can to maximize your efficacy with your layouts. So now that I've preached about the importance of layout, let's drive back into what sort of things people might find when they're investigating this aberrant colony, right? So we've got they've established permanent settlement beneath the surface of Nemesis. People living in the settlement have all been exposed to corruption to the point they've developed qualities. Those are our core clues. Those are the things characters are going to get just by looking around, right? So we want to add a couple other clues. I think it is fair to say that this colony has been in existence since at least the end of the Aberrant War, possibly sooner. So we'll say, what we say, judging by uh, technology and we'll say technology and personal items found throughout the settlement. This colony dates back to the time of the Aberrant War. Judging by the technology and personal items found throughout the settlement, we'll spell throughout correct. This colony dates back to the time of the Aberrant War. It's difficult to determine if the colony was formed prior to the war's end or shortly thereafter, but it is at least. Now we're gonna double check some time frames because we don't want to make sure we got we want to make sure we don't have those wrong. So let's see. Just checking time frames here. Okay, so 2067. And our start time, I believe, is 21:23. Yeah. So about 50 years, right? Give or take. So we'll say it's at least 40 to 50 years old. All right. Great, grand. We'll say 40 to 60 years old. Just to cover a nice gap. All right. So then maybe we'll add in one more clue to sort of foreshadow if they've done the investigation that the level of devotion that these sub-aberrant mutants possess for their aberrant leadership. So obviously that is not a core clue. We're just going to say people in the settlement revere their aberrant leaders in religious fashion. Offering them both obedience and worship. So these are really kind of, again, these are things that like are cool to know, right? But they don't necessarily affect the content of what is going to follow in the scene. They don't necessarily affect the interaction with the cult leaders, though it may. Having that more information is always a good thing to have. It might spark some ideas in the player characters. But if they do not take the time to investigate the settlement before heading to the meeting hall, they're not losing out on anything. They're not missing anything that's going to be vital to the story. Make sense? Clear as mud? Cool. All right. So now that we've got that investigation wrapped up, we'll say that we'll add in one more actual I think let's add in one more core clue just so that we can be sure that everybody knows. This will just help point the investigation in the direction we want it to go. We'll say core clue, the ICE personnel are not being held in any of the residential they must be in the meeting hall. That way we're ushering them in that direction. And these we just sort of fix. Formatting on real quick. Lickety split, all done. So the party may proceed to the meeting hall at any point once they've breached the settlement's defenses. Upon I don't like how it's phrased. How about upon completing or after completing any investigation All right. I am the king of rephrasing a sentence in the midst of writing the sentence. So we're going to say after completing their investigation or in lieu of same, the party may proceed to the meeting hall. So we know that this scene is going to be about intrigue, right? We're going to need to determine attitudes and atmospheres. So what do we want to do? We'll say once they're at the meeting hall, the party is ushered in. The central chamber where they're brought before we'll say the cult leader. I'm gonna need to name that cult leader. And I'll just mark those off with asterisks so that I'm sure that I get back and give them an actual name because nobody likes that. Nobody likes to be called the cult leader. Nobody wants to be referred to by their job. How about they're brought before, let's do a triumvirate. That's fancy, right? We'll have the cult leader. So we'll have, maybe there'll be a sheriff. I don't know if they would need, like, where it gets a little bit like into the weeds. How does this how does the settlement organize themselves, right? Do they need a sheriff? Is there somebody who handles crime in this settlement? I mean, it would stand to reason there's going to be some, right? So we'll say, yeah, the sheriff. Why not? Let's assume for the moment that is accurate. So let me just make sure I don't spell that word wrong. Ah, we got two F's. Beautiful. Um, so we have a triumvirate consisting of the sheriff, the cult leader, and the mouthpiece of the sovereign. And that is our divergent aberrant. Right? Right. Double check on those. That's going to be our nemesis. Our nemesis aberrant. Okay, so I have here in my notes that the cult info dumps history and explains their attack as a means of preserving limited resources, protecting their home. I'm going to do that second. First, we're going to get into our attitude and atmosphere. So, as I mentioned, I believe a couple episodes back, the intrigue system in Trinity Continuum makes use of attitude, atmosphere, and bonds, basically. Bonds are something you build with a character, with other characters, that create a pool of dice that you can share, use, apply in situations. Atmosphere dictates sort of the general mood of a place or of a scene, things that are going on in that scene, things that are important to the people within it, the feelings of the people within it. And then there's attitude, which is each individual's sort of feelings on the subject, or I should say, on each other rather than on the subject. So let's just dive right in. We're going to assume the attitudes and atmosphere generally run on a scale of 1 to 5 based on intensity. They can be positive or they can be negative. Attitude acts as an enhancement. So, in essence, if you're trying to do something that supports the attitude, that falls into the attitude, you will gain an enhancement on it. When you are going against that attitude, that can serve as a difficulty penalty, I believe. Let me triple check that because things are a little. I've been juggling a lot of systems lately. Yeah, so if I apologize, let me clarify. The party gains an enhancement based on. So if your attitude is positive, if the party's or if the person that you're talking to, their attitude is positive, you gain an enhancement based on that. If their attitude is negative, they gain the enhancement against you. Make sense? So that also comes into play when attempting to make shift attitude actions. So by assigning these attitudes, one of the things that we're doing here is giving the player characters a possibility of gathering information, conceivably maybe even securing their release through interaction, through discussion, through a conversation. So let's lay out what those are. The atmosphere. And again, atmosphere kind of works like attitude. It modifies everyone in the area. And those generally are rated 1 to 3. They can increase a positive attitude if the atmosphere is positive, or decrease negative attitudes. Likewise, if the atmosphere is negative, then it decreases positive attitudes and increases negative attitudes. So these things sort of work hand in hand. And if somebody wants to, if the player character wants to adjust the attitudes of other people in the scene, they may need to contend with the atmosphere first, or they can just kind of swim against the stream, as it were, and try to adjust the attitudes directly without addressing the atmosphere. Those are both options. It really depends on how the party wishes to tackle the situation at hand. So, let's say the atmosphere of the scene is, we'll say, tense. At a -2. The attitudes of the triumvirate I don't know why I keep. It's just fat fingers. Why I keep putting B in triumvirate. Okay, sorry about that. So the atmosphere's tense at a -2. The attitudes of the triumvirate. Let's give them each a separate attitude, so that way, depending on how the party wants to address the situation, they might, depending on which person they address, they might have separate results, right? So, we'll say each member of the triumvirate holds their own attitude toward the invaders. Because ultimately, that's what they are, right? The invaders, the party. We'll just say the party so that we're not confusing the story. Just double checking, making sure we don't have any sort of a capitalization issue that I'm missing out on. But no, those are all fine. So we're going to say all these are negative attitudes. We're going to say that the sheriff and again, I am going to go through and give these characters proper names at some point, but right now we're going to break down each of their attitudes based on how they're referred to currently. So the sheriff holds an attitude of, we'll say, suspicious at 2, and that is, of course, negative. Now remember that stacks, right, with the tension of the scene. So now we're looking at basically 4 enhancement that the sheriff receives when trying to resist any sort of social interaction, right? It's going to be a little bit hard for the characters to reason with them. We will say that the cult leader, I kind of like the idea of the cult leader, like, feigning some level of neutrality, or not even feigning, like actually adhering to some level of neutrality. Perhaps they take their responsibility in civil leadership seriously. Maybe they are believers in justice. It's possible that apart from their, obvious violent behavior toward the miners, it's possible that they don't actually bear any inherent ill will to humanity. Maybe they just want to be left alone. So I can see the cult leader then having sort of a neutral approach. We want to skew it a little bit negative because obviously they're not thrilled about the situation they're in. And impartiality is largely an illusion. People have sides. People pick things that you have biases. So we'll say it's going to be a -1, and let's call that. They're not necessarily suspicious. They're more, I guess, cautious, right? Okay. The cult leader is. So we're going to say sheriff holds an attitude of suspicious -2 toward the party. The cult leader holds a cautious -1 attitude regarding the party. And the mouthpiece of the sovereign probably sees them as pests, right? I think this is a nemesis aberrants are not weak. and the party is in the mouthpiece's home. The party has come into their territory, into their nest. They have no reason not to see. They have no reason to see these people as anything but an annoyance. So I think we will go. Um, is annoyed by the intrusion, resulting in a annoyed Okay. The atmosphere of the scene is tense, -2. Each member of the triumvirate holds their own attitude toward the party. The sheriff holds an attitude of suspicious, -2 toward the party. The cult leader holds a cautious negative attitude, -1 attitude regarding the party. The mouthpiece of the sovereign is annoyed by the intrusion, resulting in an annoyed. I don't like using annoyed twice. Let's say irritated. -1 attitude toward the party. So what that translates to system wise, just so you're aware of kind of what you're setting these people up for, right? They can make an influence action. The player characters can make an influence action. They can try to shift the attitude, try to bring these story guide characters into a more favorable attitude toward them so that they can hopefully have a better chance of getting what they want. What that requires them to do is make influence rolls to attempt to shift that attitude. Those influence rolls will be adjusted by the attitude and the atmosphere. So if they're and because they're broken out with individual attitudes, they will need to contend with those specifically. So trying to bring in the attitude of just one member of the triumvirate might be a little bit easier. You're just looking for the cult leader. You're really only dealing with 3 shifts, right? You've got bringing their attitude to neutral or positive. As you know, neutral would be 1 shift, positive would be 2. And then you can build it beyond there. If you want to totally negate the atmosphere, you either need to be able to make an influence check to actually alter that atmosphere, which some abilities let you do. Chances are good. Your ability to do the player's ability to do so while sort of on trial is going to be limited, but it's certainly not impossible. And there's absolutely powers that can be deployed to help address that particular issue. But yeah, if they wanted to try to talk their way out of the situation, they would need to bring those attitudes positive first. Hopefully negate or remove the negative atmosphere, and then they might have a shot of it. But even still, that would be difficult. So we're going to need to break down kind of what that's going to look like mechanically. But we've got those reference points and basic numbers kind of laid out for us. I just noticed we are about an hour into broadcast, so what I'm going to go ahead and do right now is I'm going to go ahead and take a quick AFK. I'm going to just take a moment, refill my drink, whatnot, stretch my legs. I highly recommend anyone watching this, whether it be now or in replay, do the same. Get yourself a walk in. Stand up, take a few steps, come back. We'll be back momentarily. Before I run off, I do want to remind you once again that the world below is over on BackerKit. We have been unlocking stretch goals left and right, and it's beautiful to see. I'd love to see us unlock a few more. So if you've not yet done so, head over and toss your support to the world below. We got 19 days left. Time is starting to run thin. We got plenty of stretch goals left to unlock. So if you've not yet gotten involved, please do so. If you have gotten involved, please tell your friends, share the words, spread the campaign around, get people involved. Also want to remind everybody that we've had a few releases come out. We've got the Lore of the Traditions is up now in print on demand as well as PDF. I had the extreme honor and pleasure of working on this book. I'm super proud of it. Cannot recommend it highly enough. If you're a fan of Mage the Ascension at all, there's a lot of really, really cool information in there that I think you will get some good storytelling knowledge out of. Also want to remind you that my own community content release over at Storyteller's Vault, the Dread Touched, an expansion for Chronicles of Darkness, is also now available. And this introduces a new playable archetype that you can bring into the Chronicles of Darkness. A person, one of the Dread Touched, is a person who sort of lives in the space between mortal and horror, and they must struggle to maintain their own psychic integrity lest they slip completely and become one of the devoured. So that's up $195 over at Storyteller's Vault. So everybody hang tight. We'll be back momentarily with the remainder of our broadcast. Thank you so much. All right, everybody, welcome back. We have returned from our break. I hope everybody got a nice stretch in, got some beverage. I have a lovely lime bubbly water here. One of my favorite things about this particular beverage that absolutely is not sponsoring me, but you're welcome to reach out, bubbly, is that all the cans have cute little sayings on them. This one says, "I feel like I can be open around you." It's very adorable. But drink your drink, remain hydrated, and let's dive back in. Um, Before we get too far, I do want to remind you all that we are still raising money for Make a Wish. You can head over to that link right there and toss any bucks you might have in that direction. And of course, the World Blowbacker Kit is still active. So, where we left off was we were discussing attitudes, atmospheres, things along those lines. Those have been established. We kind of know where we're at with these. Um, what we have here now, we have the situation that several of these scenes have pointed to. If the party gets knocked out at any point during the earlier combats, they wake up in this room. If they succeed in making their way there, defeating their enemies, um, investigating the settlement and all that stuff, and eventually make their way to the meeting hall, the scene is really no different at that point. They're all roads lead to Rome, as it were, right? So now that we've got that established, a couple things that we want to know that we want to establish. The cult is going to info dump their history. They're going to explain where they came from. They're going to explain um, that they've been here since the Aberrant War. They intended to live peacefully without any sort of negative interaction or any interaction at all with humanity. And even when ice arrived on the asteroid, their leadership decided to permit them to operate. It wasn't until the ice shelf broke that they decided to get involved. And while the ice shelf breaking does not destroy their settlement, we want to make sure that we illustrate that it's caused some real problems. So maybe one of the things that we can even go back and pepper in earlier in the investigation, right? Um, a little piece that they could find. It's not a core clue, but it does sort of help sell that point. So we can add in a clue that says that a large tunnel on the south side of the settlement appears to be collapsed recently. The Let's look at the powers that we've given our folks. Maybe they can do something um, to sort of seal that tunnel. Yeah, I mean they've got beams, right? They've got their energy beams. So perhaps we'll say that the tunnel, the rocks were melted together to provide an airtight seal. over the tunnel. So the idea being that, like, there was another whole part of the settlement. That part of the settlement was encased underneath this ice shelf that, as we mentioned earlier, the ice employees inadvertently broke while they were mining. And that exposed that part of the settlement to hard vacuum. People had to evacuate, and the aberrants had to melt those rocks to cover that gateway. So we see that in a little bit earlier in the investigation, should they choose to look around and find that. If they don't, the aberrants can explain it to them. It's just one more little sort of flair, sort of narrative bit to lend credence to their story and to expand things. And that's another thing, too. When you're creating a story like this, you know, mysteries, investigations, things like that don't come into being ex nihilo. You know, you build these, you build clues. There's a couple different ways to tackle it, but I find that there's absolutely no reason not to go back in and pepper things in as you think of them at the tail end, right? As you're like, okay, well, this, and this are what has happened. So how can we foreshadow that earlier? When an idea like that pops in, you scroll back, you go back to that earlier content, you pop in the idea at that point. So that there is that bit of a clue. There is that bit of a thing that people can latch onto. Okay, so we'll say the cult leader calls the meeting to order and asks the party who for their identities and their reason for being on Nemesis. The So once they've identified themselves and explained their predicament, the cult leader will say they explain the history or provides a brief history of the settlement. How about a brief overview of the settlement's history? So this is where the party can learn, right? Yeah, that's where the party can learn the origin, the true story of, or the alleged true story of how this settlement came to be and what sparked this attack. So we'll say the cult leader explains that the previous generation or the elder generation followed their aberrant leaders to Nemesis during the final days. No, maybe not during the final days, but during the height of the Aberrant War. They chose to we'll say the sovereign provided a provided an option for a new life and their followers agreed. A distant asteroid, and the followers agreed. The group traveled to Nemesis by warp. And immediately began construction on their underground settlement. We'll say breathable air. And potable water were brought to Nemesis by warp, though these resources are now maintained through, so thanks to farming established by the early settlers. And additional water drawn from ice deposits within the asteroid. So now we have kind of like, we're answering a few questions, right? Because how do these people, survive on this remote asteroid out in the middle of the asteroid belt? Nobody knows they're there. So how are they able to thrive? Now we've answered some of those questions. They brought in a bunch of breathable air, drinkable water, and then used that to sort of kickstart a settlement, sort of doing a kind of a poor man's terraforming on the subterranean cavern, right? They planted crop that would not only allow for food, but would allow them to recycle the air, make it breathable. They brought in some exterior water, but they also have water they pulled from ice deposits. So now we've explained kind of how this works. How are the basics addressed? Now I want to mention that when ice first arrived on Nemesis, the settlement was willing to Settlement watched their progress, but refused to interfere. Though ICE was mining useful material from the asteroid, they'd done nothing to impact the, we'll say, the they've done nothing to impact the resources settlement relied upon for survival. So basically what we're saying here is that when ICE first showed up, they started digging, but not in any way that interrupted life for these aberrant cultists. So let me go ahead and fix our text frame. Settlement kept a close eye on ICE's progress. But refrained from any interaction for fear of anti-aberrant prejudice. Now, this is where things start getting sort of interesting, right? Because what we have here, the settlement is sort of forming into a slightly more benign arrangement than maybe we had initially envisioned, which is fine. I like that idea. I like that this is something that is sort of between, if you're familiar with the Aeon setting, there's a planet called Eden. And Eden was formed by Nova colonists prior to the end of the Aberrant War. They took off and were like, we're going to build this is our own place. And these are Novas who sort of shunned the idea of giving themselves over to their transcendence. They sort of held on to more what you might look at in the Aberrant Age as like Team Tomorrow type ideals, right? They view themselves as a part of humanity, at least to some degree, and as having shared goals with them. So Eden is kind of a bit of a paradise in which the human residents and the Nova residents live somewhat harmoniously. So this is similar to that in the sense that they've managed to make a self-sustaining life where they seem to get along. But we're definitely steering into these aberrants are a bit more violent and their followers a bit more off kilter than perhaps one might find in Eden. So it's kind of almost like the hot spot between Eden's paradise and sort of the propaganda version of what aberrant settlements like, or like the aberrants on Cancelugi, for example, right? So kind of like in a middle ground there, which I like. It's fun. It questions. This will, if done well, this will question call the characters to question sort of their own prejudices and their own presuppositions about aberrant behavior. So they refrain from any interaction for fear of anti-aberrant prejudice. And we'll say when ice cracked the ice shelf, the southern portion of the settlement was imperiled. Everyone living and working under the ice shelf had to be evacuated, and the tunnel leading to that area had to be sealed to save the rest of the settlement, save the remainder of the settlement, right? And then, of course, we want to make sure that we drive home how dangerous this was. We'll say not all of the colonists in the southern, in the affected area, were able to evacuate in time. A dozen people died before the evacuation was complete. The evacuation and reinforcement of the southern tunnel was complete. Right, so now we have a further situation where this tragic accident, right? Nobody had planned this. This wasn't an attack on ISIS part. It was just a mistake. But this tragic accident now has body count. So that means that maybe the cultists and the colonists are going to be a little less forgiving, right? About the presence of interlopers, about the activities of ICE, the carelessness with which ICE sort of broke the ice shelf and endangered their people, because there's bodies involved. People died, and that is always a tragedy. Let's see. Then we'll hop in here and we'll say that once their history is conveyed, the cult leader explains their attack as a means of preserving the settlement's limited resources and protecting what remained of their home. So now we get into like, okay, how do we want this to play out, right? What options do we want to have for this to play out? There's obviously the option where the party just throws away any pretense of diplomacy and just tries to shoot their way out of the situation. Probably not a smart play, given the amount of power that's hanging out in this room, but it's an option. It's a thing they can do. So we want to make sure that we address that. We want to make sure that we give the players an option to negotiate for the freedom of themselves and the ICE employees, right? We want that to be a possibility, maybe a challenging one, given the attitudes and the atmosphere that are floating around. But we do want to still cover that option. And then, of course, maybe the party just throws their lots in with the aberrant cult. They maybe say, "Hey, it sounds like you got a good plan, good thing going here. Let's help you out." It's not impossible. So maybe we should cover that too. So, once their history is conveyed, the cult leader explains their attack as a means of preserving someone's limited resources, protecting what remained of their home. The triumvirate communicates their regrets. At the destruction and loss of life, but rightly asserts that simply releasing the ICE employees will expose their settlement to aggressors. We'll say off-world aggressors. And place every life on Nemesis in danger. Right, so now here's the conundrum, right? Writ large, right there, have the triumvirate come around and say it. Like, if we let these people go, then we're possibly looking down at a minor aberrant war on our front door as the UN and all these various other forces sort of just come in and try to throw us out for being here. It's a real fear. It absolutely is justified given the tropes of the setting, given the backstory of the setting. No reason not to believe that would absolutely be the response. So how do the player characters address that? How do they cope with it? How do they move forward? Well, let's give them a couple options, right? Triumvirate communicates their regrets, destruction, lost life, but rarely asserts simply releasing the ICE employees will expose their settlement to off-world aggressors and place every life in Nemesis in danger. This is challenging for the party to argue against because it's a fairly accurate assessment of the situation. So we'll say the party can attempt persuade Okay, so what I just typed up was after the exchange, the party can attempt to persuade the triumvirate to release their prisoners, both the ICE employees and the party themselves. Doing so requires, we'll say, requires unanimous agreement among the triumvirate, which can only be achieved if the party manages to shift all three members to a positive attitude. Okay. After the exchange, the party can attempt to persuade the triumvirate to release their prisoners, both the ICE employees and the party themselves. Doing so requires unanimous agreement among the triumvirate, which can only be achieved if the party manages to shift all three members to a positive attitude toward the party. And then I'm going to put in a reference to the shift attitude action in Trinity Continuum. So and well, actually, we're going to sum all this up together because we're going to make it so we're going to set it up so that they have to, not only do they have to shift the attitudes positive, they have to negate the negative atmosphere. So this makes it pretty hard, right? They have to overcome 2 levels of negative atmosphere and collectively like 5 levels of negative attitudes. It's or 4 levels of negative attitudes. So it's not easy. It's going to require some work and some planning on their part, but they could conceivably talk their way out of the situation. We have given them that option. Solve the problem via intrigue means the party may either choose to fight their way out, freeing themselves and their fellow prisoners through violence, alternatively, alternatively, they may permit themselves to be housed with the other prisoners and break out by stealthy means when opportunity once everyone is together. I'm going to break that out into a different paragraph, right? So let's talk about fighting their way out. Well, okay, one more thing we need to establish: where exactly are the prisoners? We're going to say the prisoners are going to be held in a holding area below the meeting hall. So where do we put that information? We'll put it during the cult leader's sort of monologue. After the cult leader breaks down what happened, what the consequences were, what their actions were in response, they reveal the ICE employees are being kept in a holding pen beneath the meeting hall. This is where the triumvirate intends to incarcerate the players as well. Should they choose to keep them alive. Right? Okay, so we got that handled. We may go back and elaborate on that if the situation demands, sort of as we're building this out, but that's enough information for now. So we got the party can attempt to negotiate. Failing to solve the problem via intrigue means the party must either choose to fight their way out, freeing themselves, their fellow prisoners through violence. If combat erupts in the meeting hall, the triumvirate will fight with the aid of a number of cultists equal to the number of PCs in the party. So basically what you're looking at is all three members of the triumvirate stick around to fight, as do an additional number of cultists, equal to the number of player characters in the party. So they're going to be outnumbered. They're going to be outnumbered and outgunned a little bit. It doesn't mean they can't win, though. I'll say the remainder of the spectators and citizens flee when combat begins. And then we'll say the triumvirate, the cultists who stay behind will fight until incapacitated or killed. While each member of the triumvirate will fight until reduced to half health, at which point they will attempt to flee. They're going to try to go out into the settlement, basically abandoning the meeting hall and running out away from the fight if they are reduced to half their health or lower. So that way, we've got, there is a possibility to win in that combat scenario. It's not, the odds are not in the party's favor, but it is definitely doable. So we got that handled. We've got alternatively, they may permit themselves to, we'll say the party. May surrender, permitting themselves to be housed with the other prisoners. They may then attempt to break out by stealthy means once everyone is together. So let's actually note here, if the party is incapacitated during this scene, they regain consciousness and the subterranean, I don't need to say subterranean, this whole network is subterranean, in the holding pens beneath the meeting hall. They find the remaining base employees also held captive. And we'll say in lieu of combat, so now again we're sort of funneling every scenario toward that subterranean holding pen, right? We're shoving the adventures sort of in that direction without putting it on rails necessarily, right? Because if they fight and they win, they know that the people are down there. That makes most sense for them to go to. If they fight and they lose, they will be knocked out and taken into the holding pen where they're held as prisoners. If they surrender and throw themselves at the mercy of the triumvirate, they're taken to the holding pen to sort of await, I guess, sentencing. Perhaps I'll elaborate on exactly what the plan is for the story guide characters, just so that we know, just so that the story guide can know, okay, this is what they want out of this scenario, and adjust their story accordingly. But either way, no matter which of those scenarios we face, we wind up with a scene where they're going to need to break out. Going to need to break out of the prison, either themselves and the ICE employees who've been held, or just they have to go break them out. But either way, there's going to be a bit of a breakout. That's going to be kind of the hanging action in this scene. And maybe what we'll do, just because, again, sometimes things take on a bit of a life beyond the outline. I think given the way we've built this story out, maybe the beats that we've written need a little bit of examination. So maybe what we do is we'll add in another scene, a fifth scene that focuses on what happens in the holding cell and the actual act of breaking out. And then we change our current scene 5 to scene 6, which is where we deal with sort of the post-escape action. Make sense? We'll dive into all of that, though, next week, because looking at my clock, it looks like we are at time. So once again, I want to thank everybody for tuning in, whether you're tuning in live or tuning in on YouTube once this has been posted. It's always a joy to work on these things, and I love getting audience feedback and stuff. I really hope that you all enjoy it. If you do like my community content, I would definitely recommend popping over to Storyteller's Vault to pick up the Dread Touch, my latest sort of offering for Chronicles of Darkness. It introduces a new character type, the Dread Touch, who are sort of halfway between human and horror. Lots of cool stuff that builds onto that existing framework. New way to engage with Chronicles of Darkness. It's lots of fun. Thank you so much. Is it Cathedral? I hope I didn't pronounce your name too wrong, but thank you. I'm glad you've enjoyed the stream. Also want to remind you all that we are currently raising funds for the world below. We've unlocked a few of our stretch goals. We would like to unlock a few more. So head over there if you've not yet done so. If you have, please spread the word, comment. I know there's a lot of discussions going on Reddit about it, on various RPG net forums along those lines. Go in those places that you hang out and talk about it. Discords are a huge help with the sort of fracturing of social media that's taken place in the decline of Twitter. A lot of people have sort of gone into their own little Mastodon servers and their own Discord servers, and that's where they're mainly engaging. So if you can bring this information about the world below into those places and get some eyes on it that might not otherwise see it, that would be a huge help, and that will help us ultimately build a more robust core book and a more robust setting with supplements. And then, of course, we are still raising money for Make-A-Wish through the end of the month. So if you've not yet done so, please toss them a few bucks, whether it's $1, $5, $20, $2,000. Anything you can give to Make-A-Wish is going to go to an amazing cause and help a lot of people. I am taking my leave of you. I will definitely be back here next week to work on some more community content. But before then, you'll see me a couple times next week. I have the new episode of Scarred Sins of Shelzar happening Wednesday at 9 Eastern. And I believe I will be engaged in another World Below actual play next week. So keep an eye on the Monday meeting notes over at theonyxpath.com, so you can get an early peek at our schedule as that gets published on Mondays. And until then, wash your hands, get your shots, take care of yourselves and each other, and we'll see you again real soon.